Hey everyone, my name is Larissa and today we will be reviewing AICE International History Chapter 1.1. Let's get right into it. Chapter 1.1 is Why Was Imperialism a Significant Force for Late 19th Century Europe? The period from 1871 to 1914 witnessed a new wave of imperialism that historians refer to as New Imperialism. To understand why imperialism became such a significant force, we must first examine the economic and political motives that drove European nations overseas. So let's examine the economic and political motives for imperial expansion. The desire to find and exploit new trading opportunities had been the main reason for imperial expansion since the 16th century. Following a policy of mercantilism, the most powerful European nations aimed to increase their wealth through trade, establishing firm control over all aspects of commerce. Gaining overseas possessions provided a cheap source of raw materials and labor, as well as valuable products not available in Europe. At the same time, these possessions provided a guaranteed and lucrative market for European goods. However, during the 19th century, a new economic motive developed. The Industrial Revolution meant that European industry expanded rapidly. Goods were mass-produced on such a scale that it became essential to find new sources of raw materials and new markets in which to sell them. Moreover, entrepreneurs who had made rapid profits from industrialization sought new places in which to invest their wealth. Britain was the first country to undergo an industrial revolution, enjoying enormous economic advantages during the first half of the 19th century. Britain was the workshop of the world, able to produce goods more quickly and more cheaply than any other country. But as the Industrial Revolution spread across Europe, Britain's advantageous situation ended. By 1850, the economies of the German states had been transformed. By the time of its unification in 1871, Germany had emerged as a serious industrial and commercial challenger to Britain. This competition was enhanced by what became known as the Long Depression, a period of price deflation that lasted from 1873 to 1896. As a result of rapid industrialization across Europe and the USA, the production of goods was outstripping demand. Businessmen and industrialists were forced to lower their prices, leading to declining wages and job losses. Governments were put under enormous pressure to protect and promote their nation's economies. European countries therefore began competing for new overseas possessions that would provide guaranteed markets for their industrial products. Just as industrialized nations needed new markets, they also needed to identify and exploit new sources of raw material such as cotton, copper, rubber, and tin. Large quantities of these materials could be found in Africa and Asia. Writing in 1902, the British economist John Hobson summarized the economic reasons for imperial expansion. He argued that imperialists believed that they have new markets for growing manufacturers and new outlets for the investment of surplus capital. Imperial expansion, he wrote, was a necessity for a nation with great and growing powers of production. Turning to political motives, the late 19th century witnessed an increase in nationalism throughout Europe. Germany and Italy were keen to establish themselves as newly unified nation-states. France was determined to recover from its humiliating defeat in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871. Confronted by increasing economic competition from its European neighbors, Britain proudly boasted about the size of its empire and the power of its navy. Addressing the British Parliament in February 1870, the Earl of Cavernon said, "We have an empire such as no other people have ever possessed. Britain alone has built up a vast empire. It is an empire of which we have reason to be proud." European governments increasingly portrayed overseas possessions as symbols of national pride and power. French governments argued that it was France's destiny to be superior to other nations and to spread its language, culture, and beliefs to other parts of the world. The French politician Paul Dogmer argued, just as Rome civilized the barbarians beyond its borders, we too have a duty to extend French culture and religion to the backwards people of the world. By 1870, political power in Europe remained largely in the hands of wealthy landowners, businessmen, and entrepreneurs. However, industrialization had led to the emergence of a large and increasingly organized working class, which demanded social, economic, and political reform. In an effort to reduce this threat, governments portrayed overseas expansion as beneficial to everyone. Senior politicians such as Jules Ferry in France and Joseph Chamberlain in Britain viewed imperialism as a way of diverting popular attention away from social, economic, and political inequalities. They argued that imperialism would provide their countries with finance required to pay for social reform and improve the condition of the working classes by ensuring steady employment. There were also strategic motives. Prior to 1869, trading with India and the Far East involved a lengthy and hazardous voyage around the southern tip of Africa. Between 1859 and 1869, the Suez Canal Company constructed a canal linking the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea across Egyptian territory. This enabled the European ships to travel and from India and the Far East more quickly and cost-effectively. However, the instability of the Egyptian government threatened this new trading route, and so in 1882, Britain reluctantly took over the administration of Egypt. Many historians believe that it was the establishment of British power in Egypt that encouraged other European nations to gain territory in Africa. The emergence of new imperialism. So let's discuss the nature of new imperialism. The new imperialism had three main characteristics. First, its geographic scope centered on Africa and Asia rather than the Americas. Second, although the rush to acquire new possessions involved rivalry, there was a real attempt to prevent constant warfare. The Treaty of Berlin in 1885 laid down rules for expansion in Africa. Third, new imperial countries emerged. Massive industrial growth led to the USA to seek greater control over Central and South America, while Japan embarked on its own industrial and military revolutions. Several factors made this expansion possible. Medical advancement was crucial. In the late 18th century, Africa was known as the white man's grave because of its diseases such as malaria. The medicine quinine, discovered by French scientists in 1817, proved to be an effective treatment. Technological advancement also helped. The mass production of high-quality steel facilitated developments in railways and steamships. Iron-hulled, steam-driven ships were able to navigate rivers such as the Congo and the offering easier access to African interior. Telegraph networks made it easier for imperial nations to administer their overseas possessions. At the same time, the development of fast-firing rifles, machine guns, and heavy artillery gave Europeans a distinct advantage over poorly armed Africans. Europeans also justified their actions through theories of racial superiority. Scientists developed theories regarding the classification of races, with white people classified as racially superior to Asians and Africans. The publication of Charles Darwin on the origins of species was widely misinterpreted as providing scientific justification for such views. Convinced of their racial superiority, many Europeans believed they had a duty to bring order, stability, and civilization to the lives of pagan Africans and Asians. The French economist Paul Leroy-Beaulieu wrote in 1891 that civilized people of the West had a duty to spread knowledge of medicine, law, and Christian religion. Nature and purpose of the scramble for Africa. The scramble for Africa began in the last quarter of the 19th century. In 1817, only 10% of Africa was under direct control of European nations. By 1900, over 90% was under European control. Britain took possession of most of the southern and East Africa. France concentrated on West and Northwest Africa. Belgium's King Leopold II claimed the enormous Congo basin, exploiting it for rubber and ivory with shocking cruelty. Germany entered the scramble later, gaining control of Cameroon, German East Africa, German Southwest Africa, and Togoland. This is a cartoon depicted by the Americans, and it shows a negative portrayal of Britain expansion into African territory. So there was a massive impact on Africa due to imperialism. Europeans developed states with administrative systems, provided education, built roads and railways, and introduced new crops. However, these benefits came at a price. Africa was randomly partitioned according to the needs of Europeans who took no account of existing boundaries. As the British Prime Minister Lord Salisbury admitted, "We have been engaged in drawing lines upon maps where no white man's feet have ever trod." Traditional African cultures were undermined. There was a large-scale exploitation of African resources, and at times, this exploitation caused alarming levels of inhumanity. King Leopold II from Belgium used forced labor, effectively a form of slavery. Workers who failed to meet their quotas were beaten, mutilated, or killed. Okay, let me cut that. Next, let's discuss reasons for and extent of domestic support for overseas expansion in Britain, France, and Germany. Support for overseas expansion varied across Europe. In Britain, popular support was encouraged from a young age through compulsory state education. Maps of the British Empire were proudly displayed on classroom walls. Newspapers owned by wealthy pro-imperialists shaped public opinion in the favor of overseas expansion. Popular literature, including the novel Kim by Rudyard Kipling, justified British rule. In France, the government played the leading role, fostering patriotism to state education and adopting the policy of the Mission Zivilistreichs, in Germany. Imperialism provided a uniting factor for a country formed from different social and political backgrounds. Nevertheless, some people remained opposed to imperialism. The Polish-British author Joseph Conrad raised major issues about imperialism and racism in his novel Heart of Darkness. The British economist John Hobson concluded that involvement in the new imperialism had harmed Britain economically, politically, and socially. He claimed that the high expenditure needed to maintain the empire made it impossible for the British government to carry out much-needed social reform. Despite this opposition, the fundamental principle of imperialism appeared to have been accepted by most Europeans. Thank you for watching. This concludes our summary of Chapter 1.1 for AICE International History. I wish you the best of luck with all your studies. Bye-bye.